When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
Every Who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton. But where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one Who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and low prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as Who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today we are talking about Hortense Mancini, who was a woman who lived in the 17th century. I was going to say England, but England, France, Savoy, various places. And we did 6 episodes about her in 2023, if you're a longtime listener, during my Internationale season. Her story is just, there's so much to it. There's so many eras that it turned into a 6-part miniseries about her. And one of my main sources for that 6-part miniseries is an academic named Dr. Annalisa Nicholson, who has done so much research about Hortense, and she has various articles that she generously shared with me when I was doing that research. Honestly, we reached a point when I was doing that research where I was just messaging her, asking her opinion on various things. She was like really the guardian angel of that whole series. And she has got 2 books that are now available about Hortense Mancini. That is, she's been researching it for so long, and now these books are available, and I love it. The first book is called The Letters of Hortense Mancini, a bilingual edition. So it's the first ever collection of her letters. Like, Annalisa was traveling, like she's going to Monaco, she's going to private collections, like she's finding these letters wherever they are, finding them and translating them into English. So you can read the letters in the original French as well as in English in this first ever collection of Hortense's letters. And I think letters are such a good way to see what a person was like in a really direct, informal way. The same way as if, like, you're listening to me in this podcast, but if you saw my DMs, if you saw me in a group chat, like, you get more of a sense of what a person is like. And the letters really provide that for her as well. Annalisa's second book, that has also just come out, is called A Salon in Exile, Hortense Mancini and the French Diaspora in Restoration London. So 2 books about her, and I'm so thrilled to have Annalisa joining me on this podcast episode. So if you remember the 6-part miniseries from before, this is just like a walk down memory lane as she and I kind of walk through Hortense's life and her influence and her significance. And if you haven't heard those episodes yet, then this is sort of an entree to you. And since this is coming out Christmas week, if you got some sort of long road trips ahead of you or anything, why not scroll back in your app and find the 6-part Hortense Mancini miniseries to really fill in the gap of this remarkable woman's life. And I'm so happy that these books exist. I'm so happy Annalisa was able to join me. We were both looking forward to this conversation so much, and we had a really nice time. So please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Annalisa Nicholson. So I'm joined today. I'm so excited to talk to, I don't know if this is the first time that I use I work with somebody as like a helper for a podcast, and then they later come on the podcast. But it's Annalisa Nicholson, who has 2 books out right now about a woman whose name on the podcast, I called her Hortense Mancini, just kind of a French pronunciation for the first name, Italian pronunciation for the last name. Annalisa, welcome, and explain what we should call her.
Hello.
How we should pronounce it.
So exciting to be on it after listening to the amazing 6-parter on the woman I call Hortense Mancini. So she was born Hortense Mancini in Italy, and then she moves to France when she's younger, and her name becomes Frenchified to Hortense Mancini. And then after that, she moves to London, and some people call her Hortense Mancini. Some people start to anglicize it a bit, so it's Hortense Mancini. Some people are still calling her Mancini. So there's all different pronunciation variants, and yours is perfectly acceptable.
I really went through it when I was first. So one of my sisters, she studies languages, or like she knows languages. And I was saying, I'm reading with this person. Her name is Hortense Mancini. And she's like, in Italian, it would be Mancini. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, but it's French. So it's like Hortense, I guess. So, but it's Honestly, I'm grateful to be even having this conversation with you, because how many people have, you and I would assume, both looked at whose names are Marie.
Mm-hmm.
Like people, I just did a whole series about Marie Antoinette and her sisters, and it's just like, oh my God, everyone is Marie. So I'm happy that she has an unusual name. Yeah. Which maybe it's just because, where is she in the birth order of her and all of her siblings? She's one of the younger ones, right? Like they had like Marie, they had Marie Anne, like they used up all the kind of normal names.
Yeah. So they start with Laure or Laura, and then there's Orlan, and then there's Marie, and then they go kind of wild with Hortense, and then they go back to Marianne, kind of traditional. But Hortense Mancini herself does this. All of her daughters are called Marie something. So it's super confusing. Marianne, Marie-Orlan. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. She's got this lovely cosmopolitan name that sums up her life. Very memorable, hard to get her confused.
It is interesting. And, she's sort of destined for something more interesting than other people, because honestly, I'm grateful for an unusual name. That's all I'm saying. But what I was thinking we could do today in this episode, like if people have already listened, I know that there's listeners out there who've heard my 6-part season mini series about her before, but there's people, so this will be like, remember this, like we'll be reminiscing, but also people who haven't heard that yet. It's like an introduction to her life for people who don't know who she is. So I was thinking in sort of like a Taylor Swift way, we can go through her eras.
Yes.
Hortense Mancini, because she had very distinct, it's like she's living here doing this, and then she's living here and doing this. And that's part of why I wound up doing a 6-part series, because it's like I wanted to just like really sit in like what was her life like here, and then it completely changes.
Yeah.
But actually, Annalisa, I want to ask you first, as somebody who's just written 2 books about her, or like one of the books is translations of her letters, how did you even come across her in the first place?
I first came across Hortense Mancini when I was doing my master's in London. And I didn't know what I was going to do my dissertation on. So I went to the library and took out a bunch of books on early modern women and France to see what it would throw up. And I came across the English translation of her memoirs. It was the most incredible story, as those who have listened to your 6-parter will know, about this woman who lives at what is initially a fairly ordinary life in the lower aristocracy. And then she becomes this very rich heiress, and she's married off to an awful, awful husband. And instead of tolerating it, which we might expect from a 17th century woman, she tries to get out of the marriage. And when she doesn't, she's had enough. And she flees, and she does so by dressing as a man and gets this cross-dressing reputation. She embarks on affairs with men and with women. She goes partying. So she doesn't let this awful marriage crush her. She spends years on the run defending herself. She doesn't just have secret affairs either. She has affairs with like rulers. And then she comes to London eventually, becomes the mistress of Charles II, which is where most people have come across her before. And then she set up this salon in London. And I thought, I really want to know more about this salon. I was doing my master's in London. Her salon was in London, but I couldn't find much about it. And so that became the subject of my master's dissertation. But really, it was those kind of contemporary echoes about her life that resonated, right? So she's experiences domestic violence, and so she has to flee. She's also cross-dressing and bisexual, so experimenting at a time when it's very difficult for women to do that. And I just wanted to know more.
Well, and also I think, like, when we get to that era, we'll discuss it, I'm sure. But the whole thing, in preparing to talk to you, I was like going through my old notes and like obviously looking through your books as well. And I was like, in that time period, I mean, honestly, it's a time period like I don't even know, 1970s. Like women couldn't have their own money, really. They couldn't have their own assets. So she left her husband, and she couldn't just be like, okay, I'll just go get a job as a bartender. I'll just like go work in a restaurant. Like she couldn't work because she was a woman. So it's just like, what's she going to do? So there's this added level of like, and that's why so many women still stay in terrible relationships for these financial reasons. Like they can't support themselves. So the fact that she was just like, fuck this, I'm going to figure something out, I think is very inspirational.
Yeah. And I think you really honed in onto something that's really important for her and what she talks about in her memoir, which is that sense of financial dependence on her husband. So she had been this, or essentially one of the richest heiresses in Europe, and she gets married, and immediately her husband blocks her accessing that fortune. So she becomes financially isolated, totally dependent on him. And he really uses this to taunt her and tease her. She talks about times when she's asking for money, asking for access to her jewels, and he basically says, no, you would waste them. I'm in charge and you can't have them. And that sense of utter dependence must have really rankled for someone who had grown up surrounded by wealth, but also that is her wealth that she's brought into the marriage to him. And so she knows when she flees, she can't access it when she's married to him, but she's not going to be able to access it at all if she flees. And she still makes that decision. And she talks in her memoir about the fact that her exile was a kind of financial education. She suddenly had to start really thinking about money, because if you're going into exile, you need money for travel. She's moving around, she's using courses, etc., carriages. She's staying with people, money is passing hands for protectors and the like. There's clothes. This is a woman who's used to living that aristocratic lifestyle. She still, to some extent, wants to continue a life that she's been accustomed to. And so she has to reach out to people. She's essentially writing to people, asking for money, looking for rich protectors, and getting things on credit, using the fact that she's a duchess to gain credit. So I think, the sense of money troubles is really there for her, and it will be through the rest of her life. You were talking, about the different eras of her life. The first bit of exile is a financial education. The 80s, when she's in England and there are problems with the monarchy, she's seeking money. In the 90s, when her health is failing, she's seeking money. It's always there for someone who is cut off from that wealth.
Wasn't there something, I promise listeners, honestly, Merry Christmas. This episode's coming on Christmas Eve. This is my gift to the listeners and to myself getting to talk to you. But this is we're just having a chat. But we will start going through her life, I promise. But wasn't there something about so in historically and current day as well, one of the reasons why women would amass jewels is because that's a way, jewelry, that's a way that they can have wealth themselves. That's you can't have a bank account or whatever, but if you own these diamonds, if you had to pay for stuff, you could pawn them or whatever. Didn't her husband not let her have her jewels or something? Wasn't that part of his whole emotional abuse thing?
Yes. So you're absolutely right that many women in the 17th century would have accrued a kind of wealth through things like jewels or gold and silver plate or other kinds of objects that they could own that were worth money and that in theory that they could sell if they needed to. And Mancini did have this incredible jewel collection. And in her memoirs, yes, she talks about that, about her husband essentially taking her jewels from her and refusing her access to them, even if she wanted to wear them or to see them. And it's quite a poignant anecdote where she talks about going to him one night and asking to have access to her jewels. And he says, no, I can't trust you. But he doesn't just say, I can't trust you. He does so with this really snide smirk, as if he's taking pleasure in blocking her from it, because she wants her readers to know this isn't reasonable. He's not doing this because he really thinks she's untrustworthy. He's doing it to taunt her. But the other thing to say is that unusually Mancini was actually someone who did have wealth in her own right. So normally women wouldn't have had that. Their wealth would have been kind of more jewels and plate, etc., because families typically would appoint an heir, and it would be the firstborn son or the nearest male relative. But in Mancini's case, that's not what happened. She had a brother and he was passed over for her. She was seen as more dutiful and a better bet with Cardinal Mazarin's enormous legacy. So what was even more grating for her is she was in this incredibly rare position to be a woman basically with her own wealth, and still because of the misogyny in the marital law at that time in France, when her husband blocked her access to that wealth, there was nothing she could do about it. She appeals to everyone, every aristocrat, even to the King of France. But the way that the law is structured in that time, there is nothing anyone can do. Nobody can force the Duke of Mazarin to mend his ways.
Okay, so so she gets this wealth because she becomes the heiress of her uncle. A couple people, so I forget if I said this when we were recording or before, but I did ask on Instagram and on Patreon. I was like, listeners, what do you remember about this story? Because this is one that people bring up to me. This is a memorable person who I've covered on the podcast. I think her story is, if you don't know the story, it's a memorable and interesting story. But what some people did mention was like, oh, she had that mean uncle. So that's what some people remember. So the first era, like she's in Italy, she's this little girl growing up, but through her mother, I think, right, she's connected to the most powerful man in France. So what's her early years?
Yeah, so this is her dutiful era. So she's born in Rome, but then as a child, she and her sisters are taken to France because, as you say, their uncle is essentially the most powerful man in France. His name is Giulio Mazzarino, or Cardinal Mazarin, as he's now known. And he'd risen up the ranks to become first minister or prime minister to the child king Louis XIV. So the king of France is in a minority, and Cardinal Mazarin is de facto ruler, making decisions on behalf of the child king. And Cardinal Mazarin has amassed the most enormous fortune from this position, made up of things like duchies and the income that you get from owning land and estates, from palaces, and from his huge artwork collection. He was a real collector of fine pieces of artwork. And he brings his relatives to France, mainly to marry them to the aristocracy, to fortify his own power base. It's not just to indulge them or to be kind to his relatives. It is totally strategic. He wants to marry them to nobles in the land to solidify his wealth, but increase his own power. And he probably planned to leave his wealth to one of his nephews. But for various reasons, that doesn't happen. And he seems to have a kind of favoritism towards Hortense from a young age. She must have been quite a likable child, because one of her sisters, Mary, would later say that their mother also treated Hortense more kindly than the other children.
She had, I would say, a star quality somehow.
Star quality. She was like, she was the perfect child. She was kind of dutiful, and she didn't get herself mixed up in too much scandal at the court like her sisters did. She kept herself a little bit to the side. She seems to have been quite a reflective child. She talks about reading a lot in her youth, writing down philosophical questions, and watching on as her sisters get involved in some of the most scandalous intrigue in that era. And she seems to have had a good relationship with her uncle. She does talk in her memoir about her uncle complaining that he didn't think she and her sisters were religious enough. But I get the mean uncle, which is that he has brought all of these girls to France and he just wants to marry them off, and he's not interested in who they want to marry or giving them an education. It is only in marrying them to the most, or to the people he thinks it's best for him to marry them off to.
In terms of, just from like what, it's funny because I was like, what do I remember? But I'm like, what do the listeners remember? Because I know I like went off on tangents that are like not in my notes in the episodes, but remind me actually listeners. So I did, a few months ago, we did a whole like Marie Antoinette series, and we talked a lot about Versailles. So this is like the little boy who would grow up to build Versailles, but like Versailles is not a thing yet. It's like other palaces is what we're talking about. But this is also historically the time period where various things are happening in England that we don't need to get into because it's very complicated. But ultimately, the man who will become Charles II is in exile in France right now. And he's not the king, but he and Hortense meet each other as young people, and the uncle blocks them from being together. Am I remembering that? Something like that. He meets her and he's like won over by her, and he's like, oh, maybe I could marry her, but then she wasn't allowed to. Something like that.
So what happens is, so Hortense is quite young at this point. She's probably about 11 or 12. And the exiled Charles II has heard that Cardinal Mazarin is making this young girl, Hortense, his heiress. And Charles II is in exile. He wants to reclaim his throne, but he has no money. And therefore, this young girl, young teenager, is appealing to him. So he and his advisors start working on a proposal. But Cardinal Mazarin rejects this proposal because Charles II is a penniless exile. And that is not what he's interested in. He wants to marry his relatives to the best matches in France or in Europe. And that is somebody rich. That is somebody with the status of a duke and prince, and with very good prospects for the future. He doesn't want his wealth squandered on trying to reclaim the throne of England. we don't know if Charles and Hortense had met properly. I mean, they definitely crossed paths during those years because they would have seen each other at court performances and balls, but we don't know how much if they ever spoke.
Well, and she's like a child. It's not just like, oh, it's not even like, oh, she's 18 and it was like this lost love connection.
No,
it's like, oh no, this is a child who's going to inherit money. And he's like, she's a little bank account and maybe I can marry her. Like that's what's going on.
Perfectly put. And these negotiations are going on for years, because Charles comes back again. And he's rejected at first and he comes back and says, oh, are you sure? Cardinal Mazarin sort of, because he doesn't want to offend Charles, he says, oh, no, my niece is far too lowly to marry somebody as great as the King of England. But Charles comes back and says, no, I'm very happy to advance this proposal again. And Hortense is in the background, dutiful as ever, not involved in any of these negotiations, simply waiting for her uncle to decide who she's going to marry. And the uncle rejects Charles again. And then Charles does reclaim his throne. He is invited back to become the King of England, Scotland, and Ireland again. And Cardinal Mazarin then sort of discreetly tries to bring up the subject of his niece Hortense. Oh, would you in fact like to marry her now? But by that point, Charles is a monarch and his sights are higher. He wants to marry the daughter of a monarch, probably. So it's not what happens, and it's a real shame in a way because I think they would have been quite well matched. Neither Charles nor Hortense end up with a perfect or particularly happy marriage, and we can only imagine the kind of power couple they would have been. Alas, it didn't work out, and Hortense is then married to this very pious man that Cardinal Mazarin has chosen for her.
Before we talk about this horrible man who she marries, I do want to just like follow that thread because that was what another listener said. Like when I was like, "What do you remember?" and she was like, "If only she had married Charles, and they would have had so much fun together. They would have probably had a bunch of kids because each of them and then, well, first of all, like to me, I'm just like, ooh, and that's a huge sliding door to like the entire British royal family. If he had legitimate heirs, but also I'm like sexy as hell because Hortense was gorgeous. I mean, yeah, she's a child at this point, but she like grows up to be this beautiful, gorgeous, like very sensual woman. Charles II, as listeners of this podcast know, I find very attractive. And he was like a good time guy. Like he had the two of them together would have had fun. That's what I mean. It would have been like a sexy power couple.
Yes.
Too bad.
Agreed.
Didn't work out.
Agreed. Yes. They both had this wonderful sense of wit. And also a kind of joie de vivre, like they wanted to enjoy life. No matter what was thrown at them, they seemed to have always risen to it with a smile, with a joke. Let's have some wine, let's have some fun, life's for living. And it is fun to speculate about what would have happened. It would have saved Hortense from a really miserable marriage, and Charles, as you said, probably from a succession crisis. I do wonder, and maybe we'll talk about it later, when we're thinking about Hortense's London era, about how Charles feels towards infidelities. He is a bit weird. On the one hand, he is this restoration fuckboy and he goes around sleeping with like court women and maidservants, etc.
There are like numerous books that are called like The Mistresses of Charles II. Like he had like
a catalogue.
Yeah.
But sometimes he gets his back up quite hypocritically about these women taking other lovers, which he will eventually do that with Hortense. So you don't know, but all we know is she was definitely his type. She was strong-willed and yes, loved partying, loved drinking, and had that kind of libertine values that they both had in common. So they would have understood each other, I think, better than the people they ended up with.
So it's just sort of it's an interesting sliding doors moment because like to people who don't know the story, like Charles II is coming back in the story, but we'll get to him later. They're just two sexy ships passing in the night. They're both called the Fubs. And then, so she's married to this guy. God damn it. Mm-hmm. Explain who this guy is. This
guy, his name is Armand Charles. French name, kind of clunky to say in English. From this point onwards, we'll call him the Duke of Mazarin, because that's the title he gets. And he's much older than her. She marries him when she's about 14, 15, and he's probably in his 30s. He's a very plain looking man, but worse than that is he is a huge bore, super pious, obsessively so. And he's chosen by Cardinal Mazarin because he's seen as a safe pair of hands for this huge wealth. It's a total misjudgment on Cardinal Mazarin's part, because Armand Charles will turn out to be not just really pious, but this massive litigant. He just wants to sue everyone, anyone who he's easily offended. And anyone who offends him, he wants to sue. And so he ends up squandering this wealth on so many legal cases. But yes, Cardinal Mazarin picks this man. And at first, Hortense, there's no protest at marrying him, even though she is a catch. She's the most beautiful of all of these sisters, and they are seen as very beautiful sisters. She comes with this huge dowry, and some of the other matches that she is offered are younger guys that she might have liked more, but she still marries this very plain looking, very religious boor. And almost instantly, the marriage proves unhappy. He is controlling. He wants to have a wife that is at home all the time and praying, and not doing much else, allowing him to confiscate her jewels and the like. And she's used to a life of partying. She's got 4 sisters, though by this point one of her sisters might have died, but she's used to being around lots of different people, going to little salons, spending a lot of time in the Louvre Palace, and her husband doesn't want her to. And they are constantly clashing. But she puts up with it at first, because that is how she's been raised to be kind of subservient, to accept it. She doesn't know at this point how else to be. So she kind of concedes to her husband. She argues with him, but she gives in. He plants spies around her, so he makes ensure that all her servants are in fact his spies to see what she's doing. Clearly jealous and paranoid to have this very young, very beautiful wife. He can't handle it. And he really is the villain of this piece. He also seems to have been quite volatile himself. There are lots of anecdotes that come out from this time about very bizarre behavior that he engages in. The Duc de Saint-Simon has one where the Duke of Mazarin asks all the servants to stand around him and water him because he's decided he's a flower for the day. There's another story that crops up in maybe the letters of Bussy de Rabutin about him changing the appearance of all the women servants in his household because he's worried that they're going to inspire lust in the men around. So unfortunately, this is who she ends up with.
Doesn't he have something, I don't know, I think it might be later, but it ties in with what you're saying about his behavior, where they inherited from Mazarin this incredible art collection, and didn't he paint like all the nudes, he covered up their nudity, or he smashed the genitalia off of statues and stuff. He had a real compulsion about that sort of thing.
So it is a little bit later, but essentially in reaction to Mancini's flight and her continued refusal to return to him, he decides to take out his rage on the Mazarin art collection. And so he smashes up all of the nude statues. He throws black paint over those Renaissance paintings, of women, nymphs bathing, that kind of thing. And word gets out that he's done this. So one of the servants must be so terrified to see his master destroying this art collection, not just because these pieces are culturally important, but because they are worth so much money. One of the servants must tell someone, because the Minister of Finance, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, somebody very senior in the French government, comes rushing to the Mazarin Palace. It's not very far, the Louvre Palace and the Mazarin Palace, or what's now the Bibliothèque Mazarin. It's a really short distance between them. But he comes rushing over to stop the Duke of Mazarin, and he hinders him, but he can't undo the damage. And it's a huge amount of damage. His motivations are mixed. In part, he is destroying some of Mancini's wealth and dowry, some of what she's inherited, because these artworks are worth so much money. But he's also showcasing that obsessive this obsessive way. He sees sin everywhere and feels the need to do something about it, to destroy it, erase it.
So this is, like it's, in terms of like just me and the podcast and how many stories I've done about women in past centuries getting into terrible marriages, like this is maybe the most terrible marriage to the most terrible person. Like he's just, and a lot of this is documented. We'll get to this when she writes her memoir, but she explains like this is, in a very misogynistic culture, this is worse than what anyone else is doing. Like this is horrifying everyone else around them. Like he's so extreme, and she's this very young woman. And so I think this introduces her next era, which will be her escape.
Escape era. Agreed. It is a really terrible marriage, even by early modern standards. And she knows that. He is so uncompromising. At this point in the 17th century, lots of couples do separate. Lots of aristocratic couples, once they've had a few children, will live separate lives. They might live in separate wings of their palaces, or even simply separate rooms. They divide their wealth up. Sometimes the women receive an annual pension, and the Duke of Mazarin is having none of it. So after sort of 7 years of putting up with the Duke of Mazarin, of going to convents, of turning to the court, of trying to convince him to accept an arrangement, she gives up. He's never going to change his ways. And she, as you say, enters her escape era.
Well, and also I wanted to mention, so like you said, like she tried other things first. She wasn't just like, screw this, and put on some trousers and ran away. Like she tried, like people do today, honestly. And this is where the story has, and I think like the fact that your books are coming out now, like I think this is such a good story for people to read now, because it just kind of shows yet another example of like a woman who like appeals to the authorities, and it's just like, this is happening to me, and they're like, sorry. Like that still happens today. So like she tried the legal remedies, and just nothing there was possible. So she had to go to this extreme measure.
Yeah. She has lots of sympathizers. Many of the court judges want to rule in her favor, but it's difficult because there are older judges, and it seems like the Duke of Mazarin might have bribed some of them or persuaded some of them to take his side. And there's only so much anyone else can do. There's only so much somebody outside of the household can do, because ultimately husbands have so much authority over their wives in this era. And her case study illuminates, exposes how terrible that balance of power is when it gets to this extreme, that she can be socially and financially isolated, and she starts to fear for her life a little bit, because not because she thinks he's going to kill her, but because he does things that are pointlessly dangerous to her health. He makes her go on these long trips to his estates when she's only just had a child, for example, and things like that. He doesn't really seem to care about her. So she's eventually realizes she has to leave, and it has to be now, while she's still able to leave. So she spends a few months planning what she's going to do, and she tells as few people as possible. She only tells her brother and a couple of servants who are going to accompany her. And she's so scared. She's so scared and anxious. And then she becomes more anxious, thinking someone's going to notice because I'm not eating and I'm not sleeping. But nobody does. It's quite a sad revelation that I find in her memoir, that she says, but she's so sure somebody is going to ask her, what's happening? Why are you so worried all the time? But nobody notices. And so she flees, and she takes some of her jewels. Not entirely sure how she's managed to wrangle that, but she manages to take some of her jewels because she knows she's going to need money en route, and packs like a couple of trunks of things and flees in the night. And she says in her memoir that they leave Paris and they basically don't stop until they are well away, because she knows her husband will eventually realize, and he's going to send his soldiers after her. So they have to make the longest head start possible.
And this is like, just to emphasize how long ago this was. Like there's not paved roads in all the places where she's going. Like she's in a carriage being driven by horses. Like it's a very fraught thing that she's doing, where it's just like, oh, she ran away. It's just like, no, this is like this is an intensely dangerous thing she's doing. Like the route itself is dangerous. The trip is dangerous. If her husband finds her, what's he going to do? Like this is an extremely risky thing that she's doing, but she knows this is the only, but also another person in the situation would have just been like, well, I guess this is my life. Oh, well.
Yeah.
And she was just like, fuck this. Like this really speaks to what kind of person she was.
It does. And she must have thought that her life before that just simply wasn't worth living, that something had to be done. And I think there's something intriguing about that, the value that she puts on freedom, essentially, that it isn't worth it to live in this state of incarceration and surveillance. So she flees it. As you say, it's super dangerous. They have carriages. Sometimes they don't even have carriages. They're just going on horseback. And the roads are dangerous. There are bandits on different parts of it. She's never really done this particular journey before, and she's going a long way. She is going to Rome, where one of her sisters lives, her sister Mary. It's a long journey from Paris to Rome, and they have to go a kind of snaking way. They are going to go sort of via different kind of alpine ways, then into Milan. It's quite treacherous. When they get to Milan, there's an outbreak of plague, so they're quarantined. At some point, she also has a kind of fall, injures her leg, and she can't travel for a little bit. And she's really worried that then the Duke of Mazarin spies are going to catch up with her. But she makes it. She makes it eventually into Italy, and her sister reunites with her, and then they go to Rome. And the reason she goes to Italy is because her sister is married to the Prince of Colonna, so one of these aristocratic princes in Rome, because only the protection of somebody that important can save her from her husband's soldiers. Her husband's soldiers cannot take her from the house of a prince in Rome, and that's why she has to go there. Which just speaks to the stakes of this. She can't go and stay with one of her friends in Paris or another aristocrat in France. It has to be somebody with more power than the Duke of Mazarin who can protect her.
And this is where, so she and her sister, I'm just remembering this part of the story. So, because she and her sister Marie, like they're still quite young. Like they're like, I don't know, late teens, early 20s. And just the two sisters become these celebrities just for being beautiful women. Like they become the muses to like every artist in Rome. That's this period, right?
Yes. So, I mean, what has also happened in this space between the flight from Paris and her arrival in Rome is Hortense Mancini has now become an international celebrity because the story of her flight has spread everywhere. And not just by word of mouth, but often by street songs. So people make up these songs about her and they pass all through the towns and the marketplaces and the taverns. Her story comes into kind of essentially local newspapers, these little gazettes, and everyone wants to know more about this woman. She seems like a character from a book. So she arrives in Rome and yes, she's beautiful, just as everybody said. But she's also made this incredible journey. And there's a curiosity, I guess, people have about her that she's done this quite scandalous thing. So some people are really looking down on her, but lots of people are curious to meet her, want to know more. They're intrigued by her story. And she and her sister spend a lot of time going to parties and carnivals and enjoying themselves. And painters are clamoring to paint their picture, paint their miniature, because there's this booming market for it. There's even a fight that breaks out. I can't remember if it's in Rome or if it's in Venice, but a fight breaks out between these two men over one of the miniatures because I don't know whether there's some kind of mix-up over the artist and whose miniature was meant to be produced first, but they go to duel with each other to fight over a miniature of Hortense Mancini because this is how hot this stuff is. Everyone wants a miniature. And the artist, they would sometimes write something underneath the image and claim it was something Hortense said, like some sort of, I don't know, sweet words or erotic words to really get their buyers going. Yeah. So she's in this.
So this is like if anyone, like if you just go, like when I first encountered Hortense because just some random account I follow on Instagram that's like portraits of people from olden days. And I saw the portrait and I was just like, oh, she looks interesting. She had this sort of like Sailor Moon hairstyle, these like big buns, which is like, she always had this hairstyle. And it's just like, who's this? And then even just her Wikipedia page, there's so many portraits on there.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, this person was like, who is this? Like, why would there be so many portraits painted of someone who's not, a queen of a country or something? And it's just because she was such a celebrity. Like, there's so many portraits of her and Marie, always looking beautiful, dressed up like different goddesses.
Yes.
And things like they were, I don't know. It's not even quite, I think at the time I did the podcast a few years ago, I was like, they're kind of like the Kardashian sisters. And I guess that's the closest allegory now, where it's just like they're two, like the most famous, and they're sisters and they're beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, no one can get enough of it.
Yeah. I think there are a few echoes there because, like the Kardashian sisters, there is this earlier childhood story that people got to know first, right? And with Hortense Mancini, she is this niece of Cardinal Mazarin, and people remember him. Like at first, she's just famous because of her uncle, and then she becomes his heiress, and people are like, okay. And then they hear, oh my gosh, she's done this really scandalous thing. Do you remember that super rich heiress of Cardinal Mazarin? Can you believe she's done this scandalous thing? Like these kind of echoes there of, and how someone becomes an international celebrity in this time is through doing multiple scandalous things. And then, she and Marie are kind of living it up. It's one thing that's nice. I mean, this is a nice moment in the story. Hortense has had to flee, but she gets to see her sister again. And she hasn't seen her sister in a while. For aristocratic women in the 17th century, they are often married off to men who might live really far away from where they grew up, or they might just simply have to settle like Marie back in Rome where she was born, but far from her sisters who remained in France. And so they get this really lovely reunion and they enjoy themselves. But they enjoy themselves, and there's a lot of concern over Hortense Mancini in Rome. The papal envoys are asking her to reconsider returning to her husband, essentially. They don't think it's appropriate that Rome should harbour her. They don't think it's appropriate that she should be living independently from her husband when he doesn't want her to. So there's a lot of discourse going on about Mancini, not all of it positive.
And this is also, in terms of, I like this throughout her whole story. Like, she goes through various things. And this is where you talk about this quite a bit. Well, in both of your books, how her intellect is often discounted because of her partying ways. And I think that you said, like, she grew up and she went to these parties, and then her husband wouldn't let her do this thing. And then she sees her sister and she's finally able to just like have a nice time. And I think that's nice. And I think it speaks well of her kind of strength that she's able to, that she's not just sitting around praying all the time. That's not her personality. She's just like, she wants to live a life and she wants to have fun. And that doesn't mean that she's not traumatized. That doesn't mean that she's not intelligent. That just means that's just another facet of her personality. So I appreciate that she goes to Rome and she's just like, hell yeah, let's have some fun. Like, that's always part of her. Like, she's not going to suppress that part of her personality just because the situation she's in.
Yes. She has probably been like, so full of all these things that she's wanted to do for so long, and she needs a release. And imagine the adrenaline that must have been coursing through her in the run up to that flight, and then the whole way through that journey, because it's not until the journey is over that she's safe. And of course, then she wants to let loose and have fun and party and do everything that she couldn't do before. Of course. And these were all the things that she'd grown up around, really. There is sometimes a reluctance as a result of that to see her intellectual activities and to focus on her partying. But it'd be great for people to acknowledge she can be both. She can be someone who enjoys reading and talking to philosophers, etc. And her and Marie, they do set up a little salon in Rome where there are cultural activities going on, as well as going to carnival, as well as going to parties. And it seems in the 17th century, people were undermining their little salon in Rome by suggesting it was more like a brothel than a salon, essentially making fun of the sisters and saying they were too libertine to have a real salon. And that even scholars today repeat this kind of misogynist, they kind of lazy, kind of misogynist take on her by not allowing her to be someone that has a salon and who goes to carnival.
Well, and I was trying to think about, like, right now I'm in the midst of doing this series about the Regency era, which is interesting. I feel like Hortense would have fit in great in the Regency era. But just in terms of, at that point, it was sort of glamorous. And people like Lord Byron, for instance, was known for his like extremely messy social life, for being on opium all the time, for partying. And he was this respected poet. It's like, oh, well, if it's a man, then the partying doesn't discount his intellectual stuff. But when it's a woman, that just means, oh, well, you can't be both. Like, you're either a whore or you're an intellect, and you can't be both. But it's like, how many, like, every man from the Regency era was gambling and going to parties and drinking and constantly on opium. And it's like, oh, and this is the great thinker of the time. Like,
yes.
Anyway, I'm just mad on her behalf, but she kept doing her thing, and I respect that.
Yes. I think your example of Lord Byron is a really good one. I often try to think of these to explain to people the problem of casting Mancini only in one particular light, because it's true. And in the 17th century, there are lots of intellectual men who are having affairs, who have mistresses, who gamble, who drink a lot, who go to all these parties. But if you go on the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, their page will be like scientist, philosopher. Mancini's will be mistress. And there's nothing, that she also was a mistress, but she did other things too. She was all of these things. And I guess though, one thing to level it out, I suppose it is simply just people were so scandalized at that time by the fact she chose to leave her husband, and she unapologetically then went on these 4-day partying streaks. And it was surprising. It was outrageous. She could have just maybe lived in Rome discreetly and hoped everyone would just forget that she's left her husband. Maybe they'll stop harassing her to go back to France. No, she is out every single night, to the extent that Mary's husband, the Prince of Colonna Lorenzo, he starts to get annoyed. He feels like they're drawing way too much attention to themselves, and is desperately trying to contain them, asking them to do less. When they're in Venice for the carnival, he wants to go home early. Yeah, unapologetic partying. Yeah,
and I think it's also that thing that perhaps this will come up, because I think we're going to soon or shortly at some point get into her era of like writing her memoirs and why she did that, and like explaining to everybody how bad her marriage was. But even today, you see, like, if a woman has been like assaulted or something, and it's like, well, but then she was laughing, so that means she wasn't really upset. Where it's like how people's emotional reactions to things, that makes people doubt that the thing was so bad that happened to them. So I think the fact that she was partying and having a nice time and not just, I don't know, fasting and being in prayer, it's like, well, could it have been that bad? Why did she run away? Like, if she's clearly not, her trauma response we see throughout her whole life is like to drink and to party. Yeah. Like, that doesn't mean she's having a nice time necessarily. That just means that's her trauma response. But yeah, so we still see that today. This is where, just like reading her story, it feels like she's very much of her time. I don't want to be like she was ahead of her time, but it's like she was of her time, but there's so many echoes today of this exact same.
She was ahead of her time though, because she wanted to make the argument that the marriage laws were unequal. And people would say, oh, but does it really matter? How often does this happen? Most husbands are quite nice to their wives, aren't they? Like, do we really need to change these laws? And she's like, yes, you do, because I have this extremely awful husband, and there's nothing I can do to access my wealth again, or to go and live back in my childhood home, or to see my children again. And so she is quite ahead of her time in making this argument that if her husband's refusing separation, she should have a right either to divorce, or that the courts should allow her to live separately like they do when it's for men.
This is similar to, I did an episode recently-ish about Mary Wollstonecraft, and a lot of what she was writing about was like similar stuff, where it's just like women should be, if they're in a terrible abusive marriage, they should be able to leave. And everyone was just like, I don't know about that, Mary Wollstonecraft. Where it's like, yeah. So like people were thinking these things back then, I think is important to know.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So her Rome era, like just kind of partying, like being free, but what how does that end? What is her next era that she moves into?
So her sister Mary comes to her 3-4 years later and says, I want to leave my husband. Mary wants to leave her husband, the Prince of Colonna, because she thinks he is planning to kill her. And this might sound unexpected and extreme, and Hortense received it that way, was really surprised. However, Mary had her reasons. The first one was that Lorenzo had been having an affair for a long time, and she was concerned he wanted to marry his mistress. The second was that in 17th century Rome, a very small number, but a number of women had been killed by their husbands, and their husbands never faced any justice for it. And the third was that Mary was a kind of, I guess she was an astrologer, and she looked into her horoscopes and became convinced that she was going to die. And she thought it was at Lorenzo's hand. And it's very easy to laugh this off, but she clearly felt strongly enough and was scared enough that she thought it was a very real possibility. She knew she had annoyed Lorenzo as well with her partying. She knew he was in love with this other woman. And so she says to Hortense, I need to flee. And Hortense then has to flee too, because if Mary goes, she's no ally in Rome. So then they decide to go on this double flight. And
well, I feel like they're just I feel like she goes to Hortense and Hortense is like, great, I've got these trousers. I'll get you a pair. I've done this before. Let's put on our unconvincing.
She kind of does. Yeah, it is a bit like that. I know what we're doing. She's also I have to come with you because I've done this before and it's hard. So you're going to need someone.
Yeah.
So then there's flight 2, where now there are 2 of them dressed in male clothes fleeing Rome.
I want to emphasize unconvincingly. This is from her memoir, isn't it? Where it's just the servants kept calling them Madame. They were not. Does she say in her memoir? She's just wow, in plays, it seems like this is a lot more convincing than it is in real life for a woman to put on trousers and fool anybody.
Yes. Part of it is probably that, they're not actors. They're not used to dressing as men. So you can just sort of imagine the masculine wigs not being put on properly and the doublets not being done up. Maybe as well, just their appearances and their gait and everything else is not masculine convincing. But they still maybe want some kind of disguise. So they're not very obviously the Mazarin sisters. But yes, throughout her memoirs, she says that people just don't believe that they're men at all.
And now for a quick advertising break. Oh, hello. You may have heard of HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit in America that makes home cooking easier with chef-crafted recipes and fresh ingredients delivered straight to your door. You might have heard me say that I like to get my food from them, and that's true, and I do. And here's a couple of reasons why I'm really happy to get HelloFresh, especially this time of year. So they've got lots of options. They've doubled their menu from what they used to have. So this is we're talking 100 different options each week, which for a picky person like myself is huge. Maybe you're a picky person. Maybe you live with somebody who's a picky person. You can have different options. You can try all these kinds of meals, find which ones are your favorite. And these include new seasonal dishes and recipes from around the world. That's right. They have new recipes from their global street eats kitchen featuring local favorites from around the world, which I love that, I'm living here in a place in North America where it's cold, so I like to eat food and imagine that I'm somewhere else, warmer and not here. The food is also healthier than it used to be, so we're talking 15 plus high protein recipes each week. They also help you eat greener with new veggie packed recipes that have 2 or more veggies per dish. And in fact, do you have children? 3 out of 4 parents say their kids eat more veggies with HelloFresh because because it's so good, because everything is a part of the same meal, and they kind of the vegetables are included and they're kind of hidden a little bit, which I find also helpful for myself. These meals are also tastier than they used to be. You can get steak and seafood recipes delivered every week for no extra cost. There's 3 times the seafood options that there used to be. What I'm talking about is it's bigger, it's better, and honestly, when it's cold outside, do you want to go to the grocery store, haul home all these bags? I don't. Are you going on holiday? This is my pro tip. If you join HelloFresh and then schedule it so when you come back from your holiday, the box is there, then you don't have to go grocery shopping when you're all jet lagged. It all works out really well for everybody. Anyway, so the best way to cook just got better. Go to HelloFresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm now to get 10 free meals and a free breakfast for life. 1 per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's hellofresh.com/vulgarhistory10fm to get 10 free meals and free breakfast for life. And just to clarify, it's Vulgar History 10fm. You don't write out the word 10. Anyway, Vulgar History, HelloFresh, match made in heaven.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies just to see if you could save some cash? Well, Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states. What if I told you that 2026 is the year you launch your business? Maybe you've got an idea you just can't shake, or that hobby that everyone in your life is telling you to sell. Taking that first step and finally taking action can feel impossible. But with Shopify, all you need to turn your dreams into your new future is at your fingertips. Make 2026 the year you transform into the entrepreneur, founder, and boss you were meant to be. And the one powerful move to make it all happen is starting your business with Shopify. Shopify gives you everything you need to sell online and in person, giving you all the tools to easily build your dream store. Choose from hundreds of beautiful templates that you can customize to match your brand. And you can set up quickly with Shopify's built-in AI tools that will help you write product descriptions and headlines, as well as edit product photos. Millions of entrepreneurs have already made this leap, from household names like Gymshark and Mattel to first-time business owners just getting started. Marketing is built in too. You can create email and social campaigns within Shopify to reach customers wherever they are. And as you grow, Shopify grows with you. The same dashboard that you start with will evolve as your business does to handle more orders and expand to new markets. In 2026, stop waiting and start selling with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm. Hear your first this new year with Shopify by your side.
Oh, Hilton stay, oh, Hilton stay. Your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay, oh, Hilton stay. A holiday you're saving.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. This season, enjoy spacious, comfortable rooms and friendly service when you book with Hilton instead. Hilton for the stay.
And we're back. I just love a bad disguise moment. It's a nice moment of levity.
Yeah, it's hard to tell
story.
though. I mean, sometimes I wonder if she says that just to play it down. Does she say in her memoir, oh, but nobody really believed the disguises, because people were quite angry about the cross-dressing side to her escapades. That element, that detail had spread quite fast. And she may well have tried to play it down so that it's
right,
scandalous. Yeah. Like, it's true that I did dress up as a man to leave, but nobody believed me anyway. So I wasn't really doing the gender bending thing. We don't know. But the sisters, they pack their trunks together and they pick a few trusted servants and they flee. And this seems to be maybe because she's with her sister, this seems to be a slightly more exciting flight. She talks about them leaving Rome in the carriage, kind of shouting things together as they're going. So they're not doing this discreetly at all. And then they have to find their boat that they've had this boat moored for ages, waiting to take them back to France. And they were waiting for a night when Mary's husband wasn't around. And they find their boat. But it's a bit sketchy. They don't really know the sailors and the captain. And the sailors and the captain are just as surprised to see them. They can tell that these travelers are not their usual stock. Mary and Hortense would have struggled to have hide their wealth. It would have been obvious, just from their hair and the way they spoke and probably their clothes, that they were very rich. And the sailors asked them if they'd killed the Pope. To which they reply no, but they are nervous that they then might be robbed. And somehow, miraculously, they aren't, and they are able to travel into Provence. So now Hortense has gone back. She's gone back to France, where she will not be able to stay there, and she knows it, and the Duke of Mazarin spies are straight onto her. So she just takes her sister into France to safety, and then she goes herself to Savoy because the ruler there has promised her sanctuary if she ever needs it and if she's never ever nearby.
Where is Savoy?
Yeah.
Is that its own thing at this point?
Yeah.
Is it part of France? What is it?
So the Duchy of Savoy is kind of, it's more northeastern Italy, and it's a kind of sovereign state, though much of its territory is disputed with France. But it is a sovereign state, and therefore the Duke of Savoy can offer Hortense Mancini sanctuary, and she'll be protected. You know, that French soldiers can't get her husband can't get her. And so she goes to stay there. She's welcomed with open arms. Again, people are really excited to meet this woman that they've all heard about. But exhausted, she has a kind of retreat time for a bit. So for the first few months, she is just going to the chapel every day. And everyone is very confused by this. They thought the party girl is going to come and bring the party to Savoy. And at first she doesn't. She's probably knackered because she's been on this stressful journey with Marie. And she knows she can't rest in France. She's then got to go back to Savoy. And exhausted by it all, she spends a lot of time on her own, but after a couple of months, she comes back to herself and she's at the theatre and going hunting, etc. And it's then that she decides to write her memoir, probably wanting to intervene in the public discourse about her life. A lot that is being written about her is either made up or it's exaggerated. The Duke of Mazarin is always trying to tarnish her reputation, so she decides to write her memoir. And it's quite an audacious decision because women don't habitually write memoirs in the 17th century. The only women who had done it so far in French had been queens, or there'd been a couple of anonymous memoirs published, but she is going to write a memoir under her own name, and she's going to publish it while she's still alive. And nobody has done this in French before.
This reminds me of a bit ago, I had a listener ask for recommendations of women's history in their own words. Because, you know, so many stories are just like, well, here's what this person wrote about them, and here's the letters of this other person. And I thought of Hortense immediately. I'm like, she wrote a memoir, and some of the other memoirs of other, like, quote unquote, scandalous women from history, like, were probably at best a collaborative effort between them and somebody they hired, but probably it was just somebody else wrote it for them. But this is like, she, like you talked about her as a young girl, she was intellectual, she loved reading, she was clearly capable of writing a good book. And she did. Like, these are her own words, this book.
Yes, but it's good that you brought it up because she did have help from a historian that she meets in Savoy called Saint-Réal. And in the 19th century, some scholars started to say that actually he'd written the memoirs. Even though the style is so different, even though it's kind of published like with her initials, so it's very obvious that it's by her, and she probably wouldn't have done that unless she wanted it to be written by her. And a lot of the style is similar to the way that she wrote letters in her time. So she did, but he seems to have maybe been an editor for her. Like many women of that time, she didn't have as good an education as we might expect. Even though she was the niece of Cardinal Mazarin, she did not receive anything like the education that her brothers got. So Saint-Réal would have been responsible for like uniforming the spelling, and he would take the manuscript and get it to the publisher to get it printed. The sort of thing that she would have no idea how to go about it. But yeah, she sits down and she puts the story of her life together, but she makes it very obvious from the beginning that this is a kind of defense of herself. This isn't a memoir about everything in her life. It really is focused on her marriage and why it broke down and why she has fled to justify what she's done. And the word memoir in French at this time has this kind of legal undertone. So a memoir is a witness statement that people would give in court. It could be like a character statement if you're saying something positive or negative about someone's character, or it could be a witness statement if you'd seen something. And so there's two things going on here. It's a kind of literary memoir in that tradition where she's talking about her life, but also something legal. It's an intervention in this legal suit because she is still trying to get access to her wealth. She still has a legal case going on with her husband.
Just things that this is making me think of, like, so much of her story feels like it resonates so much with so many contemporary things. Like, you see so many actors now where it's just like people are spreading stories about them and what they're doing. And then at this point, Jennifer Lopez or whoever, it's just like, hey, I just made this documentary about my life. Like, so I would like to present my side of it. Or even just like an Instagram statement. Like, people, like, we see, because she was a celebrity in her time and her name is being constantly destroyed by her horrible husband. And you see that now just with especially female celebrities who are like, Taylor Swift or whoever, just like, I would like to correct the record. Like, and in so doing, I made this album or whatever. Like, this is just her way to get her point of view across. And I think the fact that it's so unusual for a French woman to do this also speaks to the fact that she's of her time, but also very much feels contemporary. Like, she's making decisions that other women wouldn't have made. Like, she's just thinking of things that no one else would think to do. And I think it's so impressive.
Yeah. And you can see as well how much her husband's behavior has radicalized her. So she has gone from being this really dutiful niece and to some extent wife, but it has ground her down to the point she's had enough. And so she flees, and then she goes partying, and then she helps her sister go flee. And now she's like, oh, and I'm going to write a memoir, and no one's really done this before, but I'm going to do this before, and I'm going to expose the cruelty of my husband, which is also quite outrageous because they're in the aristocracy. And this is sort of taboo to be laying out all your dirty laundry, etc. But this is how much she's been radicalized. She is really on her, striking out on her own now. And it's a kind of, like you say, it's a form of PR, isn't it? When celebrities want to correct the record and they say, I'm going to do it in my own words, they're pushing for that sense of authenticity. This is my own PR. Like, don't believe everything you hear. This is the real deal. And Mancini's doing this with her memoir.
And so it does get published. It gets translated as well, right? Like, it's in French, but
people love it. They're so excited. It gets translated into English, into German, into Italian. There are multiple printings only a few years after it comes out. So we know that it sold really well. So it was quite a money spinner, really. No idea if she herself would have made any money for it or if it was the publisher or Sonreal. I've not been able to find any kind of documents on that, but it does really well. So lots and lots of people are reading this story and are really excited to read what she is saying happened.
Well, and I think too, like, when you were talking about how people dueling over her miniatures in Rome and whatever, like, she is it's the same now. It's just like, oh my God, Cher wrote a memoir. Britney Spears wrote a memoir. It's like people are interested because the person is so famous and you want to know in their own words, what are they going to say? So it's very much, we still see that today. I think just kind of, she is so famous, people are dying to know, like, but what was really happening? Like, and people read it, and it is a very sympathetic portrayal of herself, explaining how shitty her husband is. So now people get that. They understand maybe a bit better why she ran away.
Yeah. And she's quite clever in the way she argues things in her memoir. So she talks about her husband's awful behavior, but she says, oh, but this isn't the reason I left him. You know, if it was just that, I would have put up with it. However, he was squandering the wealth, and I didn't want my son, who should have been the richest boy in France, to grow up the poorest. And so she makes these quite clever arguments to get people on her side by saying, well, he wasn't just awful to me, he was squandering the wealth of the children, and wouldn't you have done the same? And she also knows that people were fascinated by all of her travels. So for her going from Paris to Rome, she goes back to France very briefly to try and sort things out with Mazarin, then goes back to Rome, then she takes Mary to Provence. So she talks through all of the travels and kind of how they did that, knowing that people are going to want to read about it, to hear what actually happened what's it like to be a woman on the run. And she knows this because this is the sort of thing that happens in French novels. She's really into novels.
Yeah.
She loves them. And these kind of runaway women is the stuff of the 17th century. So maybe she's a bit inspired by that too. But telling it, this is a true story version, right? Sometimes when you read a book and it starts with this is a true story, it draws you in more. This isn't just fiction. This is what really happened.
And it's so interesting too. And I wonder how much she read all these books, like she was a big reader, and then how much her escape was partially inspired by what she read people did in books. And then she knows, I can write a book about this because I know other people, the same as now, people like are inspired by things they see people do in movies or in books. Yeah. And it becomes this kind of like self-fulfilling thing. Like, how would she have thought, like, I'm going to put on trousers and escape? It's like, well, she probably read a book where somebody did that. And that's what occurred to her to do.
She was accused of that, actually. So I think one of the papal envoys says something like, this is what happens when you let women read. They run away from dressed as men. So there's a lot of this stuff going on. But yeah, you're right. 17th century novels, the kind of stuff that she and other women are reading often have female characters who run away dressed as men. So that is probably where she had the inspiration for it in the first place.
It's a classic.
Clearly, she wants to reach lots of people.
Yeah. And she wants them to, right. Because like, can you explain as well? Like she is still in this ongoing legal case. Well, like her husband loves to sue everybody. Like that's just his personality. And he was obsessed with her. So he's not stopped trying to get her back ever since she ran away. So part of this is like the whole thing. She has to go to Savoy. Like she has to go somewhere where she's protected because her husband and his spies will grab her no matter where she goes. So this memoir is also her sort of, it's a volley. It's like, it's her attempt to kind of this legal way to kind of show, here's my point of view. And I do think it's very clever of her, and it sucks, but it's clever of her to be like, oh no, he's wasting the money and my son. So actually this isn't just, who cares about me, but like this young boy might not get his inheritance and maybe people will care about that. Like, and they do. So she was right.
Yeah. And there's also something to be said about the fact that people will be angrier that this man is wasting money, wasting Cardinal Mazarin's fortune, because the kind of mistreatment of money and possessions is taken more seriously than the mistreatment of a wife. And she knows that. Mm-hmm. So if she can find a way to persuade people, actually, he's the one that's squandering and wasteful, etc. He's the problem, not me. She'll have more people on her side. And what she wants is, she wants two things. So she wants a separation of goods, which means that a court draws up, they inventory her and her husband's shared wealth, and then they divide it between them so that she would be independently wealthy. And she also wants what's called a separation of bodies so that they can also live separately, legally. And the Duke of Mazarin just probably wouldn't be allowed kind of in the perimeter of where she's designated to live. He is kind of countersuing her to have her forcibly brought back to him. So they've both got their legal battles against each other. And her memoir is her defense of herself and her reasons why the judges should rule in her favor.
And is it at this point, so she's in Savoy under the protection of the Duke, and then he dies. Is that what happens next?
Yeah, so he dies. And so she has to leave and she doesn't know where to go. But then the English ambassador, Ralph Montague, says, why don't you come to England? And she's not sure, but she does. It's kind of her only viable option. So in the coming weeks, she doesn't tell anyone in Savoy, but she makes her plans as per usual and vanishes one night. And again, you have the word spreads. Everyone in Europe is wondering, where's she going next? Where's she going next? Is it going to be back to Rome? Is she going to go back to her husband? Is she going to England? And it is England that she's going to go to. So finally, she is going to see properly this man, this King of England, who she could have married. And the reason Ralph Montague, this ambassador, has invited her to England is because he wants her to become the mistress of Charles II. Because there's, I just want to clarify, well, and also to see if I remember correctly, because at this point, Charles II's mistress is Louise, right?
Yes. aka Fubs.
Yes, Fubs.
Which was a word then that meant kind of like we might say thick now. She was like a curvaceous person, and she's called Fubs, and he had a royal yacht that's called the HMY Fubs. And I believe that this is the ship that Hortense takes over. At some point she rides in the Fubs, and I was really excited when I saw that in my notes. But Fubs is there, and she's sort of not a spy, but she's kind of like there to, to like bring up the French matters to the king, and just kind of like, and Rafe Montague was like, I would prefer if that wasn't the mistress of the king. I prefer if it was somebody who wasn't like constantly trying to lobby for the French, right? Like, so he wants and he's just like, oh my God, she is. Also, I just think it is telling that all along her route, she keeps finding people who champion for her, people who want to help her. It's the same way, like when she was the kid, she was the favorite kid. Like there's something her star quality, like people are drawn to her and they want to help her. Like, and they also know, like, if we send her to England, like the king is gonna take her as his mistress. Yeah. Like, that's not even a question. She's gorgeous. She's amazing. Like they almost got married before. Like, to just be like, I'm going to send her to England and she will supplant the mistress as the new mistress is like an audacious plan, but it happens like because she's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. She comes to England, and even when there are just rumors of her arrival, there's this sense of anticipation. I think it's more when is it going to happen than if it's going to happen. Because, as you say, she has this star quality. She's witty. She's very beautiful. People know that she's likable and she's funny, and they want to be around her because she's everywhere she goes. She's surrounded by people, and she has these salons, and people want to talk to her, want to hang out with her. And she comes to England, and her cousin Mary of Modena is there. And this is the conceit. So the official line is that Hortense Mancini is coming to England to see her cousin Mary of Modena. And she's with Mary, who it seems to have found out she was pregnant around that time. And because she's often at Mary's bedside, she sees Charles, and they have these.
So just to clarify, so people, reminder, Mary of Modena is the wife of the future James II.
Yes.
So Charles's younger brother's wife.
Yeah.
New wife.
Yeah.
New child bride. Yeah.
Yes. She's his sister-in-law, basically. And Charles often goes to visit Mary of Modena, to see how she's getting on, to see if she's okay when she's unwell, when she's pregnant, and Hortense Mancini is often there. And so they are thrown together. And that detail is important because they're not just walking past each other in Whitehall or at court. They're in this kind of intimate confines of Mary of Modena's bedroom. And they're kind of crossing paths, and they're not as in the eye of the court. They're getting to sit together and talk together semi-privately, if you like. And Louise de Caroual is worried. The French ambassador's worried. Everyone who's part of that pro-French faction is really worried because Charles and Mancini hit it off, but they're also very discreet about it. So Mancini is giving nothing away. She's not going around telling everyone, oh, the king has just paid me this favor, or Charles is really helping me with my marital case, or da-da-da-da-da. She's not saying anything. She's super discreet and is mostly carrying on with sort of talking to people about, Mary of Modena, of other things. I suppose she's quite witty and fun. There's no sense that she's a massive gossiper, at least maybe not about her own life, that she's witty and she likes to talk about novels and philosophy, and she's not giving anything away about this relationship.
Well, I think also we haven't dwelled on it, but I have a 6-part miniseries people can listen to. She has had various lovers throughout this whole period. Yeah. Like she is a woman of the world. She is experienced. And so when she meets Charles, who is a man of the world, who has had many lovers, like they're both, I don't want to say cynical, but they're both just sort of like, they've been around the block. Like they know what to do. They're not going to be like too obvious about this.
Yes, because it's worth saying a lot of time has passed by now since she first fled France. She's now 30. So she's grown up a lot. And she also probably knows that discretion is important if you're having an affair, or you want to have an affair with a king, that wandering around Whitehall, bellowing to anyone who will listen that you just had the flirtiest chat with Charles isn't going to get her anywhere. It's not her style anyway. But yeah, and within months, they are very clearly having a full-on affair. She is paid a lot of favor. She's at Charles's side quite prominently at balls. This is how you know that somebody is the most prominent mistress.
And this is like just what I'm recalling. England never used to have like an official mistress type position, but Charles spent so long in France where they do that he kind of like introduces this whole concept to England, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Mancini, she's very familiar with this concept. She's grown up with it in France.
But like kings obviously have always, most of them had mistresses, but there was never like, here's my mistress and like this is her resident. Like Charles, this is how you know that like Phoebus has been supplanted, because like now Hortense is like doing these roles. It's like, okay, this is the official mistress. It's like now it's like you've gone. So it's very different from how things have been in England before or after, frankly, but it's a very French way.
It is a very French way. And by this point, it's people have gotten used to Charles and his mistresses. So there is a real...
And he's great. Sorry, I just want to mention I love him and I think he's great. He's just like, he's known as the Merry Monarch, and he's just like a cool guy. Like he has these mistresses and he like pays them like allowances, and like the mistresses are like friends with each other often. This very interesting party atmosphere at court is what she's wandered into. It's like there's just the people like other English courts, even French court. Like this is like a cool time to be. It's like a fun undergraduate university vibe. Like everyone's just having a nice time. That's what's happening here. England is not often like this, but it is like this at this point.
She's met her people. She's come to England and everyone is into the party and into the wine drinking. And she's like, what? This is all I wanted to do. This is all I ever want to do. Yeah, she's met her people, and they're quite excited for her to come too, right? That this is a libertine court. She's this supposedly libertine woman. It's a good match. And yeah, Charles's brother buys her a house that's basically beside St. James's Palace. And, Charles keeps wandering home very, very late from the direction of St. James's Palace. Everyone knows kind of what's going on. But Mancini, even though she gets this official mistress position, which comes with an annual pension, and she gets rooms at Whitehall and all this kind of prominence, she doesn't really do what the other mistresses tend to do, which is just focus all her energies on Charles and keep him and obsess over him. She continues as she was before. She has a kind of affair with Charles's daughter, Anne Leonard, who's very young at the time, by the way. Mancini's 30 and Anne Leonard's about 15 years old. And they have this strange kind of affair. And I say strange because when it comes to women's intimacies, the sources can be a little bit fudging over it. But we know that they had, a super close friendship, that they're kind of always in each other's company. There's one particular episode where they are out in St. James's Park in their nightgowns doing like a pretend duel. And this is seen as like super scandalous. But most important of all is that Anne Leonard's husband is so enraged by the friendship with Mancini that he takes his wife and incarcerates her in a convent. And she apparently still, according to one of the letter writers, kisses Mancini's picture every night before bed. So I think all of those things together are suggestive that the two women have an affair.
And this is interesting. I mean, I just, we're on my podcast, we always like to, like, when we find queer stuff in history, like we want to highlight and point out. And this part, it's like, it's complicated. Because at first, when I was researching her, I was like, oh, wow, like this bisexual woman, this is great. And I'm just like, oh my God, the person she's with is 14. And then I'm like, but the 14-year-old is married and has a husband. So it's like, this is like a weird time. It's I can't be like, oh, wow, like this super sexy bisexual love story. It's just kind of like, ugh. Yeah. It's not, hell yeah, sapphic. It's just like, they wouldn't, if they made a movie of this, they would not have her be 14. Like this is.
Yes, it is hard to know what to do with it. But those are the facts. Those are the facts that we have. And we don't know what the extent of it was.
People certainly at that time thought this is what was going on. So this just lends to her whole like cross-dressing, like this like libertine, like, so just the fact that she was seen as probably bisexual, and she probably was, just kind of adds to her whole like scandalous allure, I guess.
Yes. Courtiers are outraged by this affair. Charles doesn't seem to care. He does it because he's a cool guy. He's just not bothered. So much so that Anne Leonard's mother, who is Barbara Villiers, Charles's kind of first mistress, is writing to him saying, you need to do something. You must do something about this. And he doesn't. But then Mancini has another affair with the Prince of Monaco, a man called Louis. He's very dashing, this Prince of Monaco. And he has been trying to get something started with Mancini for a long time. And she's always said no. But then maybe because Anne is now away, she gives in, and she's told by her friends, don't give in, do not have an affair with the Prince of Monaco. Charles won't like it, but she does anyway. And Charles really cares about this.
Prince of Monaco, Charles is not having it.
No, he's not. And this is the point, I think, where we see a part of Charles that sometimes we like to ignore, because we like to think of him only as the Merry Monarch. But he can be difficult, Charles, and he is furious about this relationship. And he doesn't just break things off with Mancini. He cuts off her pension, so this kind of this money that she's really dependent on. And he considers expelling her from the country. He doesn't in the end. He does calm down. But there is something hypocritical going on here, because he is probably having affairs a little bit when he's with Mancini, because that's just the kind of person that he is. And he's really mad at her for having an affair with the Prince of Monaco. I mean, maybe because it's a fellow prince and there's a rivalry there. Maybe he wasn't having any other affairs and he's really angry. But anyway, he's not happy. And then Mancini, he breaks things off with her, and he does calm down and he lets her stay in England, but they don't kind of resume their affair with any intensity like it was before. She's not the official mistress anymore. They maybe have some on-off like reunions, but she's not his proper mistress. And he takes up again with Phubs, with Carawal. He returns to loyal Carawal. And so Mancini, by the way, doesn't care about this. She does not care that she was official royal mistress and now the king's breaking off with her. She's just doesn't give a fuck. And she is like, okay, fine, no worries. I'm going to, focus all my attention now on my salon.
Because she had started this salon earlier when she got to England.
Yeah.
And can we talk about her best friend, Charles Evremond? I don't know how to say his name. What are all his names?
Yeah. His name is Charles de Saint-Evremond. We will just call him Saint-Evremond. And he is sort of 60 odd years old at this point. He's a French exile like her, but he's a political exile. So he has been exiled from France for satirizing actually Mancini's uncle, Cardinal Mazarin, and then had to leave France. And he's an Epicurean, and like her, loves witty chat, loves wine, loves sort of sitting and talking about philosophers. And they become fast friends, even though there's a 30-year age gap.
And it's like, this relationship is so fascinating to me because they become fast friends. He's like 30 years older than her, but it does not seem to be a sexual relationship at all. It seems to me, it feels like a gay man and a woman. Like, it just feels like they're just like platonic besties. It's like a Will and Grace situation with a 30-year age gap. Like, they are just... Yeah. He's so supportive of her and he's so kind to her. And I just love that for her, that she has like a man in her life who is not her lover, who is not being creepy to her. It's just like a guy who just like supports her, and it's nice.
Yes, he does sometimes play the role of lover in a joking way to her. So he sometimes writes her these love letters, but they're all tongue in cheek. Maybe because he knows he's so much older and he doesn't have a chance. And he's like, he writes a letter saying, I love you, knowing that it would never happen anyway. But he's a huge support for her and to her. He's really popular as well. So he brings her all of these friends, people that can be her allies too. And it is kind of together that they set up, or at least host, this salon in her rooms beside St. James's Palace. And this is, from this point onwards, that is what she's known for in England, really, is that she has this exciting salon. Essentially, she hosts a community of intellectuals who come and talk about philosophy and history and science. They gamble together and they talk about the latest French novels. And it's quite an important space because women are welcome there too. So it's a space where women can have these intellectual conversations, blocked as they are from other places where they might happen, like the Royal Society or universities.
I'm just looking at, because this is like the two books that you have out right now. One of them is her letters, and one of them is a book about the salon. And I just took some screen captures of some of the things that just struck me from that book. So, or maybe this is from an article you wrote, but this is, salons grew out of women looking for spaces to talk about intellectual things and to socialize because women are excluded from most other spheres where you would do this. This is something you had written. So the fact that this salon is like men and women both go, and everyone, when you're there, you're kind of all equal, and nowhere else is like that.
Yeah. So other intellectual spaces at this time are academies and universities and societies where women are barred. And beyond that, even in the kind of households that aristocratic women might grow up in, they are treated a little bit differently from their brothers. Like I said, Mancini did not receive anywhere near as good an education as her brothers. So there's an inequality to that access to learning. And the salon, at this version of the salon that Mancini is establishing in London, it comes out of France. And this desire that women have to be part of those conversations. They want to know about these new discoveries, about these inventions. They want to talk about the latest plays that they've been seeing, to be part of literary criticism because they're blocked from the French Academy too. So it is a really important and vital space for women to have, and they make it themselves, right? So they establish it and they shape it themselves, and they bring in all the kinds of people that they want to talk to and their friends too. And Mancini has grown up around this in France, and she imports it, if you like, to London. And people are excited about this because they've heard of these French style salons, and now they have a French exile, in fact, two French exiles hosting this salon in London. Right. So there's an air of authenticity to it.
And she brings objects to, this is just something else that you wrote about. Like she brings objects there because this is like, I don't know what decade we're in, this 16 whatevers. But it's just like North America is still new. Like there's all this stuff that's happening, all this colonization that England is doing. And people, it's just like, here's some objects from different places. Like here's like museum sorts of things where people would come in and they would like see these things and talk about them, and maybe somebody who discovered it would talk about it. Like it just sounds like it's such an eye-opening thing, especially for women who wouldn't be able to go to university and stuff, to like see these objects and to talk to people and to learn about these papers. Like so I really want to, you talk about, this is one of the main theses of your book about the salon, but it's like, it's such an intellectual space as well as having fun and gambling. But like the fact that she wanted to do this speaks to, the whole case about like, oh, she's just like this flighty woman. It's like, no, she's like so interested in learning things. She's so intellectually curious, and that's what's happening.
Yeah. There's a real curation to a salon environment. Some of the things that she has in her salon are probably accidental, i.e., all of her French fans and lots of the books that she buys for her library are going to be in French because that's what she reads. But one thing I was really struck by when I was looking at the inventories of the stuff she owned when she died was the number of maps that she had of all these places that she'd never been to. And she must have spent so much money on all of these maps that she would have had displayed in her salon so people can look at them. And this wasn't something that she bought just to collect maps or to say, I've bought a map. It was because people hadn't visited these places. And there was a real sense of excitement to look at a map, to see all of these rivers and hills and mountains of faraway lands, to learn something about the world.
Can you talk about this is something else that when I ask my listeners, what do you remember about the story? People were like, champagne. She popularized champagne. Can you talk about the food and the drink at the salon?
Yeah, so another thing she really brings to her salon is French wine. You can't have a French style salon without wine. And she and Saint-Evremont they're wine connoisseurs. Saint-Evremont mostly, he is a total wine snob. And so he persuades her to serve wines from Champagne at her salon, almost exclusively, because he thinks that wines from Champagne are the best kinds of wines. And it's an interesting, his logic is in fact the opposite of the way we rate wine today. And it's not because he thinks the wine from Champagne have this wonderful taste of Champagne that you can't get anywhere else. On the contrary, he thinks that wines from Champagne taste just of wine. They taste perfectly just of wine. They have no hint of their environment, and therefore they are the ideal wine. And at this time, most of the wines from Champagne are actually still and not the sparkling ones that we're used to. So they're having a lot of this still wine from Champagne, but it is, when you get to the 1690s, that's when the sparkling version starts to come through. So they probably were having that too. And because this French style salon is having these wines from Champagne, other people in Restoration London also want to have this wine too. They want to be like the wine snob and have the fancy wine, the special wine, the superior wine. And by the end of the century, it's pretty established, this wine from Champagne, as a staple, so that when the sparkling variety takes off, that's when champagne becomes instilled as the go-to drink for a social occasion.
And it still is.
As we have now.
It still is. It still is. That detail is fascinating to me. But then also, they're importing England and France throughout history. The alliance comes and goes, but there's times while she's hosting the salon where it's like there's, very familiar to me living right now in Canada, tariffs are a big deal, or like French things are not allowed to be brought in, but she's like bringing this stuff in. She's like, I'm bringing in my French food, my French wine, like I'm going to smuggle it in. Yes. Like my salon is going to have French food and drink.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's happening on and off throughout 1680s and 1690s is that England and France are at war with one another, and so there are lots of tariffs on lots of goods, and sometimes there are just outright blocks on importing French goods. But she is adamant that she needs the French wine. She pulls out all the stops in order to get this French wine, essentially writing to people who might be traveling with someone important, like an ambassador, so that they can sneak wine into England. She wants the French wine. Finding agents it's a black market. She's looking on the black market, essentially, to bring the French wine to her salon because, and this might resonate with people who spend a lot of time in France or who are French, but she basically thinks all English wine is terrible and disgusting and she doesn't want to have it, but she wants wine, so it has to be from France.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an important part of her salon. And there is something in this time, a belief that having things like wine and beautiful smells and taste kind of stimulate the intellectual mind. And that's the sort of environment she wants to nurture in her salon. She wants people to be stimulated.
And can you also talk about, I'm just looking at my the pictures I took of things I wanted to ask you about from your book, but people from different religious and national backgrounds come into the salon. Like we talked about, men and women are able to interact in a way they can't other places. But in this time of religious chaos, which it was in England for a really long time, and all these wars, but at the salon, it's everyone's welcome, seems like.
Yes. So that is a defining characteristic, actually, of her salon, which is that it's a really mixed space. It's a pan-European space. I'm not sure if she necessarily sets out to do that, but it happens by accident, and it's kind of indicative of the person she is, which is essentially that because she and Saint-Evremont have set up this salon and they're French exiles, lots of French exiles want to come. Lots of French expatriates like merchants and ambassadors want to be there too. Restoration elite in London, they want to come. So they're mostly Anglican. They're like the courtiers around Charles II. So now you've got these French exiles, mostly Catholic, with these Anglicans. And then other European exiles want to come too. So Dutch and Italian Protestants are there. There are some Portuguese Catholic exiles. And she doesn't invite these people to force cosmopolitan on the space. She herself is super open-minded. So I wonder if it even occurred to her what that necessarily meant. She wanted cool people there. She wanted people who were witty, who wanted to have fun. Or if they weren't witty and fun, that they had a kind of expertise or something that they could bring to the salon. That was what you needed to do or to be to gain entry to this circle. And the result was this unusually mixed group of people from different national and religious backgrounds, all mixing together in an intellectual space, which was uncommon for the era. And it did earn the salon some criticism, but also, I guess, generated new conversations because these people weren't always hanging out together.
Well, that's where I wonder, like, the invisible influence of this salon and the people who went there and what they learned and how that affected their research or their writing. Like, you can't quantify that, but just because the salon was around for, I want to say 15 years, something like that. 24. So like, if you think about 24 years and all of these people coming and going and meeting people they might not have ordinarily have met, like, how does that influence the work of so many people? Like, we don't know, but clearly it would have.
Yeah, it's true. We don't have minutes from a salon, and people might not always credit those conversations in their works. But it's always interesting to see who's there and how often they're there and the ideas that they might have carried forward from those meetings. That's definitely something that's a work in progress in salon studies now, how we might speculate responsibly about how the salon might have influenced their works. I mean, what you can say is that Mancini's salon was definitely part of a growing conversation about toleration. And it's part of that movement in the Enlightenment to more tolerant, more religiously mixed communities and the benefits of doing so. Her salon is a good example of that in that era.
I'm just looking at the descriptions of, like, when I asked people, what do you remember of this story? One person described it as her cool little social club in her England home.
Love it. Yeah. Her salon, by the way, up until quite recently was written off as just a gambling den. And it's a shame that for such a long time that was people's impression of it, because it wasn't that at all. It was a space, and people did gamble there, and people did drink champagne there, but they did all kinds of stuff. They operated on pieces of literature together. They performed operas together. They had scientists give lectures there. Yeah, they had scholars come and read out their works. It was all different things happened in the salon, not just gambling.
But speaking of gambling, if we're moving into her final era, which involves a lot of gambling and a lot of drinking. And so we start off talking about her finances and stuff. Like, eventually, not to get into it, but there was some upheaval in who is the monarch of England. And eventually it stopped being her friends. So she was, at that point, I think, was she cut off from any money she had been receiving from the royal family? And she had to...
Yes. So, yeah, the House of Stuart is no longer on the throne of England. And so the pension that she gets from them is not being paid. And William and Mary's kind of joint Protestant monarchy are not too keen on her. They're not too keen on her because she's French, she's Catholic, and she has a connection with the ousted Stuarts.
Yeah.
And money problems are starting to weigh her down. Her husband won't give her any. He's still trying to have her forcibly repatriated. Luckily for her, because she's a duchess, she can take on lots of debts. Now, this isn't a position she wants to be in, but she is able to get credit, and that is what she's living off. I mean, she's also living off her winnings, her gambling winnings, but that's always a slippery slope, right? There's wins and there's losses, but mostly it's credit, and she's taking on a lot of debt. And she's in an extremely precarious position, vulnerable, and she never really wanted to be in England in exile for all this time. Although she was having these lovely years of salon hosting, it was always her hope that she would get to return to France. And it's starting to seem less and less likely. So perhaps it's not that surprising that she does turn to alcohol more and more. And she gets these dependency issues and becomes an alcoholic, essentially.
Well, and I think we saw that like in her, this is a trajectory that just is familiar to me from, I don't know, life, but going from being like a good time girl in her 20s who like was dealing with various psychological problems by partying and drinking. By the time you get into your 50s, if that's been your main coping mechanism, like you need to drink more to get that soothing effect or whatever it is. So it's just sort of like, of course, this is in a time before, like with her husband on her back this whole time. I can't believe he's not dead yet, tragically. But the fact that he's been there, like, and she's got this uncertainty, it's just kind of like, there's not, like, what else is she going to turn to? Like, I feel like in her situation, there's not like talk therapy. Like, how is she going to deal with all of the stuff that's going on inside of her mind? Like, anyway, it just, and she's in this den and she's not dead salon, and there's always wine around. So, but like you see, like this is in your book of the letters, like you see Saint-Evremond is concerned, like even in this context of olden days, and a lot of people drink a lot of stuff and no one's drinking water really. Like he's like, girl, like slow down. Like, what are you doing?
Yes. It's quite tragic, I think, to read some of the letters towards the end of her life where she's really begging her agents to get her wine. She claims it's for her health. And her best friend, Saint-Evremond, is increasingly worried about her, that she's drinking too much, that she's gambling too much, that she's occasionally isolating herself. She is somebody who is being crushed by so much misfortune. She's clearly exhausted by it all. And the alcohol dependency is only exacerbating all of those issues, right? So the more alcohol she's drinking, the more depressed she's getting, and the more money she needs to buy the alcohol. So the more debt she's getting into. And it's like this awful vicious circle for her. So that by the end of the 1690s, she is much more disconnected from her social circles than she used to be. And then you have this really final tragedy in her life, which is when her daughter comes to visit her. And bearing in mind, Mancini has not been able to see her children very much over these years while she's been in exile. But her daughter comes to visit her. Her daughter is herself on the run. Her daughter has decided to leave her husband. And Mancini is welcomes her, but is unhappy, had advised her daughter not to do it, essentially said it's not worth it. Try and stay if you can, but her daughter comes to visit her nonetheless. And Mancini at that time is in a relationship with Arnold Joost van Keppel. And her daughter also becomes attached to Arnold Joost van Keppel, also takes him as a lover. And this breaks her. This utterly floors her. To be in a kind of love triangle with her daughter at a moment in her life where she's so vulnerable, where she's so unwell, it completely upends her sense of reality. And her reaction is quite harsh. She asks William III to intervene, to expel her daughter from the country. And not long afterwards, she locks herself up in her house and drinks so much that she eventually dies. So it's a really very, very sad end to her life, marked by this one kind of tragedy love triangle. You know, you think of Mancini and all these different infidelities that she herself had been involved in. And it kind of marks the end of her life too, but in a really sad way when her daughter's tied up with it, and so is alcohol and depression. Her suicide is talked about by some people as typical of her libertine spirit and typical of her Roman stoicism. But there is no doubt that she did die in quite tragic circumstances, heavily in debt, never got to return to France, husband still alive, and kind of mired in this scandalous love triangle with her daughter.
And this is where, well, Saint-Evremond wrote he wrote something upon her death, right? Some sort of a beautiful tribute to his friend. Like, I'm just so grateful that she found him when she did. Like, no one could have been a better friend to her in that era than he was, I think.
Yes. And he was such a close friend to her that when she dies, people write their condolences to him. You know, they're writing to him saying, we are so, so sorry for your loss. You must be so upset, blah, blah, blah. Which is, it's unusual for the time to have, even her relatives were writing to him. And I mean, then he, perhaps in a weird way, that's when he decides he's going to publish his writings. So for a very, very long time, Saint Evermore had refused to publish his writings. And after Mancini dies, he decides he's going to. And maybe it's because so many of them were inspired by her and her salon. There's a nostalgia he wants to recreate. And thankfully, because he published his writings, we're able to reconstruct so much of her life and about the salon, because those writings are kind of brilliantly allow you to recreate that world, see who was there, the topics they were talking about, the operas that they perform. He collates them, like writes them out properly, and then they're later published. He himself doesn't live too long after her. He dies a few years later. But yes, I'm probably going to have to go in a second.
Yes,
because I need to go and see my baby.
I'm sure. But we got to the end of her life. Just let everybody know about your 2 books if they want to learn more about Hortense Mancini.
Yes. Okay, so I have one book out now. It's an academic monograph, though I've tried to write it as accessibly as possible, and that's about Hortense Mancini's salon. And if you go to the Bloomsbury page, you can read it all online for free. You can download a PDF. It's completely open access. And I've also done an edition of her letters in the original French and with an English translation, where you can read about her life in her own words.
Thank you so much for all of your work.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry to say I have to go. It's just, yeah.
No, it's fine. I knew this would be a long conversation. Yeah.
It's still a busy time.
I get it. But thank you so much for joining me. And thank you so much for...
so much fun. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. Also, good luck with your book.
Thank you so much.
Good luck with Caroline of Brunswick. Hopefully when I'm a bit calm with baby stuff, I can read it, because I think she is so cool. And yeah, though I was thinking, is there going to be an audio book?
There is an audiobook, yeah, and that is going to be available in the UK. So yeah.
Great. Yeah. I might do it, because I'm starting to turn more to audio stuff now. That
good for new parents. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. I have to go, but this has been great.
Thank you so much.
Soon.
So again, both of her books are now available if you want to get some more Hortense in your life. So The Letters of Hortense Mancini, a bilingual edition, is available to read her letters. And then A Salon in Exile, Hortense Mancini and the French Diaspora and Restoration London. So as she mentioned, that one is like an academic book. You know, it's priced for the academic market, but it's also available open access as an ebook. And I will put a link to that under these show notes. So you can take a look at that for free. And as well, I put a link to The Letters of Hortense Mancini that you can buy from wherever you get your books from. If you want to buy it from my bookshop shop, that's the link I'm putting down below. And so what a treat, honestly, like looking back at my notes from my episodes about Hortense Mancini, reading through Annalisa's books, I was just like, oh, the memories, fubs, all of it. Like what an era that was for me personally. Like this was a woman's story. Like I think I said it in this recording. I just found out about her first, just seeing this portrait. I was like, who's this portrait? That's an interesting hairstyle. And then it turns into this fascinating person. And it turns out Annalisa's been doing all this research about it. And now these books are out there. More people are finding out about her. And I think Hortense Mancini is such a role model, a heroine for people escaping abusive situations, for people living life on their own terms, for people just like speaking up, finding their voice like she did, writing her memoirs. You can find her memoirs. The translation of them, I think, is available basically on the internet if you want to read that, or in book form as well, to really get a sense of her voice, her sense of humor. It's just in terms of this podcast and like Scandalicious Women and like Tits Out lifestyle and all of it, like she just epitomizes that. And part of where I was so excited to revisit the story for you today as your Christmas present was because when I ask listeners sometimes, like, what are the people who you most remember? Like, what are the most important episodes to you? And her story always comes up. I think she's just really epitomizes that sort of like lesser known woman from history, but who is actually so significant. She was never really given her due for a long time until people like Annalisa started really demanding that people pay attention and take her seriously in her salon and all of it. So anyway, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We're going to be back again with another. We'll be revisiting a classic episode that I think will be nice for as our final episode of the year 2025. Anyway, I do want to just remind everybody, I too have a book that is coming out in February. It's called Rebel of the Regency, The Scandalous Saga, Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's Uncrowned Queen. It will be available as a book, as an ebook, as an audiobook. So however you like to consume books, that should be available to you. It's available right now at any North American store for pre-order. Go to rebeloftheregency.com to get all those links. And it's like trickling its way out. You can pre-order at some stores in Australia, some stores in the UK. I'm hoping to have more concrete information about that. But if you live in one of those countries and you want to pre-order the book, you can. And hopefully when it comes out, you'll be able to buy it from a store in your country. I hope to have information for you soon about where I will be and when for my alleged book tour going around. I'm really excited to launch this book in front of people. Anyway, go to rebeloftheregency.com for all the information about my book coming out in February. And other than that, I mean, Merry Christmas. If you're celebrating champagne, think about Hortense, think about her bestie. Think about how it was because he was a wine snob that's become the drink that we all drink at celebratory times. And anyway, until next time, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Anne Foster. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. Regency-era artwork by Karen Moynihan. Social media videos by Magdalena Denson. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon at patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans and at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com for everyone else. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod. Get in touch with me at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.
Two kinds of fishing out here. One for fish, one for your data. Hackers try to hook you, but Cisco Duo keeps every user and device protected. Cisco Duo. Fishing season is over. Learn more at duo.com.
The war is over, and both sides lost. Kingdoms were reduced to cinders, and armies scattered like bones in the dust. Now the survivors claw to what's left of a broken world, praying the darkness chooses someone else tonight. But in the Shadow Dark, the darkness always wins. This is old school adventuring at its most cruel. Your torch ticks down in real time, and when that flame dies, something else rises to finish the job. This is a brutal rules-light nightmare with a story that emerges organically based on the decisions that the characters make. This is what it felt like to play RPGs in the 80s, and man, it is so good to be back. Join the Glass Cannon podcast as we plunge into the Shadow Dark every Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on youtube.com/theglasscannon, with the podcast version dropping the next day. See what everybody's talking about and join us in the dark.
If Bravo drama, pop culture chaos, and honest takes are your love language, you'll want All About TRH podcast in your feed. Hosted by Roxanne and Chantel, this show breaks down Real Housewives reality TV and the moments everyone's group chat is arguing about.
Roxanne's been spilling Bravo tea since 2010, and yes, we've interviewed Housewives royalty like Countess Luann and Teresa Giudice. Smart recaps, insider energy, and zero fluff. Listen to All About TRH podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. New episodes weekly.